The fandoms of today are very temporary.
The Grateful Dead invented the modern concert as we know it.
There are going to be some differences between Grateful Dead and Swifties. I think that there is a fundamental similarity in terms of how they help have a roadmap for what does a hyper-engaged fandom look like.
They're the most loyal fan base in all of music.
They kind of invented the idea of a fandom.
Formed in Palo Alto in 1965, the Grateful Dead are one of the most popular and influential bands in American history. Known for their improvisational approach to music and fusing rock, folk, soul, blues, and jazz, they were the original jam band and paved the way for others in music.
The Grateful Dead are the fathers of psychedelic culture. They are a touchstone for many generations of music fans. They've influenced countless artists. They have created really a culture unto their own, and they've made a ton of good music while doing it.
With songs like Truckin', Touch of Grey, and Friend of the Devil. The Grateful Dead captured audiences with their lyrics and visuals to match.
First and foremost, the thing about this band is the songbook. The majority of their repertoire was Jerry Garcia wrote the songs with the lyricist Robert Hunter, who's like a visionary in his own right. Their songs stand toe-to-toe with any of the great songwriters of the 20th century.
The Grateful Dead became one of the most successful touring rock bands in music history, despite having virtually no radio hits.
There was a whole culture around the Grateful Dead, this idea of live music and really being a live band.
The Grateful Dead famously toured pretty much nonstop over the course of their 30-year career. A big reason that was possible was that the fans would come every night.
The Grateful Dead practically invented live music the way we see it now. They were on the front end of go on tour and have a huge series of shows and have fans follow the tour. Essentially hadn't really happened until they began to do it.
But the thing to always remember about the Grateful Dead is it wasn't about the music. From the start, it's been about the community. And they always followed that mindset. They came out of San Francisco, out of the counterculture and what was going on in the 60s and the early 70s. They just always had this, we are all in this together and we just want to make music and form this community spirit. And that's been how they've been for all 60 years.
Now, we can't talk about the Grateful Dead without mentioning their dedicated fans, the Deadheads.
What is a Deadhead?
How would I define a Deadhead? That's a great question.
How would I define a Deadhead?
I would define a Deadhead as somebody who spends more time listening to the Dead than any other band, and it is surprising the number of people who do that.
A Deadhead, someone who is very committed. They're the most loyal fan base in all of music.
Bottom line, a Deadhead is just someone who's just obsessed with the Grateful Dead. How the people go to church, it's their savior, you know, and they're religious about it.
A Deadhead is a hard thing to put a label on because it really now spans generations, and I think you have that original crystallization that happened with the generation that came up, almost invented the band via their participation. The tailgating and the sharing and the recording, the live shows, that was not entirely made by the band themselves. That was the way the audience embraced what they were. In some ways, the culture of the Grateful Dead that I've seen is true Deadheads act as if they're essentially a part of the band.
It's been decades since bandleader Jerry Garcia's death in 1995, but the Dead surviving members have continued to play, and new fans are still discovering the group and their music.
The unexpected thing about Hanson and the Grateful Dead is our first manager, who was such a fan of this band, had traveled, had seen hundreds of shows. We were introduced through him.
We had collections of tapes, and one of the things I specifically remember discovering was like, wait a second, what are all these ticket stubs? You know, just stacks of really cool looking tickets and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, Grateful Dead shows. I'm like, dang, okay.
A lot of people that are under 30, their parents got them into the Dead. I just got given some acid from a friend, like a vintage piece of acid. So I thought it was like an art piece, but I was like, you know, I should take this. And that weekend was the Dead and Co. in San Francisco at the stadium. And I took a little of it, and I went there not even knowing anything about the Dead. I was like at the show, and it was just so awesome and so badass. I thought I'd go and see one or two songs, and I was there for 2.5 hours, so I was locked in.
I rallied some friends and dragged them along to a show. Walking towards the venue was just like an experience of its own. And that's kind of where the whole Dead experience sort of begins. You're seeing these like cast of characters and like, you know, you see merch stands, all these booths and people walking around holding the finger up.
The main thing that people who are not Deadheads might not realize about Grateful Dead concerts, there was something called Shakedown Street. Shakedown Street takes its name from a Grateful Dead song from the late 70s. There will be in the parking lot or outside the venue, there will be rows of people selling everything from egg rolls and burritos and grilled cheeses, tie-dye shirts and crystals and like necklaces and jewelry and just like all sorts of stuff. And it's like a giant tailgate basically, but full of, you know, hippies and Deadhead.
When I got to like my seats, they started playing this song, Deal. I lost my mind immediately. The music just grabbed me. Definitely the best live experience I've ever, you know, experienced.
The Grateful Dead, they were pushing the edge of what it was to be a band. Because of that, I think they attracted a whole generation that were all asking questions about their entire time in history. Whether it was the drug culture or whether it was the movement against the institutions of government and corporations, they were all rebelling in their own way. And Grateful Dead really kind of created a place where all those folks gathered and it became their tribe. You know, it became this idea, no, this is not just my band, this is kind of, these are my people.
Something I admire about the Deadhead community is their welcoming spirit. They really have formed this community. They want other people to enjoy it. That comes from the band having that kind of all-inclusive attitude. And it's spilled out to the fans. It really is, everyone's welcome. Listen to this music, we love it. We think you would love it too. So come join us.
When you go to a Dead show, there's literally the most open and free environment you could have. Everybody there is so warm. Some of the people that go there, they must have been to 100 shows. Probably some of them might have been 1,000 shows. Like they literally live their lives by these tours. And the atmosphere was amazing because not everybody's even looking at the band. They're looking at each other, they're dancing, they're jamming. I felt like it was just me coming to see my family for the first time, you know?
New Deadheads inevitably dive into the band's rich history and plethora of live recordings.
There are probably two major categories that I would say if you are trying to come into the Dead fandom, and they have slightly different experiences. There's a group of people who want to use the Dead to facilitate a spiritual experience through the addition of substances, drugs, we'll call them. Is that what you were talking? And that group of people, I would say, is extremely welcoming. The other culture, I think, is a musical geek culture. And that side is a little less friendly. It's a little scarier because even if they're full of excitement to bring you in, they know so much. They have so much rich experience. There's definitely a part of the Dead culture that is that way, where you just kind of go, I don't even know where to begin. Of course, the answer is pretty easy. It's buy a ticket. Yeah, go see a show. We've heard of Inside Baseball, but it's sort of like Inside Deadhead.
There's so much history to study with this band, whether it's various stories of various concerts and tours or diving into the 2,000 plus live shows they played over their career.
I'm a record collector, so I collected a bunch of their records. I listened to a bunch of their albums and live albums, and I just kind of dove in. This is my collection of Grateful Dead records. Some of my favorites. The box set from the Euro 72 tour. Pretty iconic. I think this released like last year maybe at Lyceum Theater. This one, with Teal Burbage, who is the bass player for Dead and Company, came out with this record last year that's comprised of a bunch of Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter songs, and it's just masterful. I think he recorded these in Iceland somewhere. This is probably my favorite record. August 13th, 75. The intro to this album is probably the best Grateful Dead intro ever, I think. It just starts with so much energy and goes into Help on the Way, and it's just fantastic.
Today, Deadheads are understood for what they are, hyper-passionate superfans. But at the band's peak, some associated Deadheads with less desirable parts of the counterculture.
It just seems cliche at this point to for people to write off Deadheads as like people that do drugs or people that don't have jobs. Like that is a caricature or a stereotype as much as being a Deadhead is a stereotype. People who I know that really love music love Deadheads.
People probably criticize the Deadheads for being these crazy fans that just follow this band all over the place. And I think it's very easy to make fun of the Deadhead community. But at the same time, I think people really respect the Deadhead community.
Did Deadhead get a bad rap? I don't think so. I mean, the fact that they sold out so many Sphere shows and everybody seems to love them, from Andy Cohen to Bill Walton, they've really hit the zeitgeist. Their fans are mainstream now.
The Grateful Dead were pioneers in building fan communities. While other artists would restrict fans from recording their concerts, the Grateful Dead were the first to let fans record their shows in its entirety without any consequences.
They have this famous saying that once the concert is done, they're done with it. They would let people tape their concerts and trade them and bootleg them, and they never cracked down on the fans who were doing that.
This was a very revolutionary way of approaching it and helped them in turn get bigger.
They're understanding that accessibility is the most important to help grow their audience and to let their audience have the freedom to be part of the community. When they started releasing the recordings, they started to trade the recordings, and the Dead just letting them do that, it made them so much bigger.
Along with allowing fans to tape their concerts, they also looked the other way when fans made bootleg merchandise, creating their own t-shirts and collectibles for other Deadheads to purchase.
There has been a lot in the last 10 years. The Dead are cool again in the way that they weren't. Part of this are these vendors like Online Ceramics and stuff making really cool merchandise. You see football stars wearing tie-dye shirts and rappers and stuff.
This is my collection of Grateful Dead shirts, at least some of them. There's probably like 50 here. Some of my favorites. Yeah, I really like this one by Jeremy Dean, Fall Tour. I think this one was for the final shows at the Sphere in Vegas. I think someone got this for me as a gift when I was with the Giants. I think this is from like the 90s or 92 or something like that. A City Field show, another Online Ceramics, one of my favorites. Elijah Funk is masterful with his designs.
In today's age of fandom and stan culture, it's not uncommon for fans to follow tours, even virtually, as they travel the country to dissect songs played at shows and devote your life to an artist.
The fandoms of today are very temporary. They come and go. The band's been around for almost 60 years, and that group has been just growing since day one. They kind of invented the idea of a fandom.
They pioneered fan mailing lists. They pioneered a lot of the way they approach merch is very unique. And I think that you see that reflected in the fandoms of today. You look at a modern pop star like Olivia Rodrigo doing a bunch of different posters for her different tour dates. In a way, harkens back to the 60s when the Grateful Dead and their peers were making these like really unique posters.
The Grateful Dead invented the modern concert as we know it. The scale of the PA, the scale of the production, the feeling of following the tour. They did it without radio, without pop hits. They showed the way for those future fans. Frankly, the Hanson fans that follow our tours and go to 100 shows, if there hadn't been a Grateful Dead that set the tone of that.
There obviously are going to be some differences between Grateful Dead and, Swifties or the Beehive or whatever, but I think that there is a fundamental similarity in terms of how they sort of helped have a roadmap for what does a hyper-engaged fandom look like beyond buying lots of records and going to the shows. One big similarity is the way that people dissect what the Grateful Dead does night to night on their tour. Seeing the discussions online about the Eras tour, what are Taylor's special songs going to be from night to night, that sort of discussion reminds me a lot of when Deadheads are saying what songs are they going to play tonight.
Even after the Dead's singer and lead guitarist Jerry Garcia's passing in 1995, the band's living members continued on with groups including Dead and Company, Further, and Phil Lesh and Friends.
The Grateful Dead keep bringing in new fans because new generations just keep learning about them. They see that Dead and Company is playing Sphere. There was always something mythical about the Grateful Dead, and there still is. There's something just kind of magical about them.
Among Deadheads, there's always been an intergenerational aspect. People bringing their kids to the show, making it a family affair.
Some of those recordings are so timeless. An album like American Beauty, there's nothing that can top it. When kids are picking up the guitar now or getting deeper into music now, you always want to go back to the source. And for that type of music, the Grateful Dead is the source.
You can't really see the Beatles live today, or a accurate sort of recreation of what they were doing. But the Dead, you still can see them live. They still have these huge concerts, and they're still continuing to push the music forward.
The Dead has always had such an iconic way to brand themselves. Just the skull logo in one aspect, you know, like Metallica and Slayer. These bands are gonna live forever because young people find their logo, and their actual visuals, their flyers, their branding, their logos, their creative directing has always been a step ahead because of their birth in the psychedelic generation. A lot of people gravitate just towards that, the sexiness of that.
The reason I got into the band, John Mayer had a lot to do with that. He's kind of brought our generation into this world. The fact that we still get to experience this thing that's been going on since the late 60s is very unique and special.
The impact of the Dead is really interesting because it continues, right? There's sort of a fearlessness of who is the Grateful Dead. You see them bringing people in and out of the band, sort of these rotating members, people bringing their own subcultures. Say I was talking about Bruce Hornsby and Warren Haynes and like
John Mayer.
And that's something that's unique.
After forming 60 years ago, the Grateful Dead are still considered one of the greatest bands of all time.
What makes the Grateful Dead so iconic after all these decades is the music. The music is still here. The music still sounds great. It doesn't sound dated. It does take you back to a specific time and a specific mood, but in a way that doesn't feel like it belongs in a time capsule.
There's something about that songwriting and the way they play the music, the passion and the intensity, and there's just so much soul to the way they play the music that it just kind of keeps you coming.
I think it's their authenticity. They never wavered in what they do and how they do it, and just they make and what their fans want. They're just always growing and getting better at what they do.
They defined a lot of what came after. The whole idea of the jam band community came out of what the Dead were doing, whether they were doing it consciously or not, or altering their consciousness to do it.
Jerry Garcia as a person is very iconic. He does not look like a normal rock star, you know? He's a Santa-like figure, and I think that a lot of Grateful Dead fans really look up to him, and he continues to be a real cultural presence.
Almost like they created a color selection that people can now dip into and be like, this is a little bit of that. Grateful Dead embodies this kind of nerdy about music, kind of free spirit, up for the experience, up for the deep dive, and kind of like, hey, just relax, man. Let's just go to a show. Like, let's just be here right now. And I think there's an unintended consequence to the spontaneity that the Dead is built all around, which is, in order to relive your nostalgia, you have to do something new. More than most bands, the idea of inviting your friends and your family and the people you meet to come be a part of the Dead experience, that is the nostalgia of the fan who wants to relive it over and over again. They get to go, I remember the first time I went to a show when my friend brought me. I want to relive that moment. And I think that probably plays a great part in why young people are still finding the Grateful Dead.